Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT ranked meta video. Our analysts are here to go through the 11.4 meta for each stage of the game. We'll be recapping the meta in terms of items, compositions, and general how to play during each of the early, mid, and late game. We're back to a meta focused around flexible play as rerolling got hit hard by nerfs in 11.4. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links on our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As usual, we're going to begin our ranked recap by covering the current meta for items. Overall, there's a large emphasis on specific items for carries in set 4.5. That makes it much harder to pivot into different compositions, so generally, the first few items you make tend to dictate what comps you'll be aiming for later on. Beginning carousel can determine a lot for where the game is headed for you, so let's talk about priority components from high to low. At the highest priority, meaning the components are heavily contested, we have sword, bow, and rod. These three components are used for most of the current items in the meta. Below those three, we have glove, chain vest, and tier, with the lowest priority being belt and cloak. Sword is typically used for items like Deathblade, Hextech Gunblade, and Guardian Angel. But really, there's a lot of uses for swords, just those three are often the most common to make from an early sword. Deathblade, along with other items like Infinity Edge and Giant Slayer, are great on champions like Olaf, Tryndamere, and Xayah. Bow is primarily used for Kayle compositions as she needs at least Rageblade and RFC to reach full carry potential. Runaan's Hurricane is still a top tier item despite being nerfed, but the difference in damage output will be noticeable on a champion like Olaf. Another item to look out for is Last Whisper, which is one of the best items for Tryndamere alongside of Infinity Edge. Rod and Tier are mostly used for spell damage champions. Jeweled Gauntlet, Hextech, Morellonomicon, and Deathcap are all relatively common for champions like Aurelion, Nico, and Morgana. Locket is a solid early game choice for the defensive shields. Tier goes towards Chalice for those types of compositions, same with Blue Buff. Otherwise, Tier is reserved for Hand of Justice. Glove is a solid pickup from the carousel since it's built into several meta items like Hand of Justice, Jeweled Gauntlet, Last Whisper, and Infinity Edge. Chain Vest is mostly used for early game Sunfire capes, same with Belt. Other Chain Vest items include Locket, Titans, and after the buffs, Stone Plate. Belt and Cloak are quite easy to get on later carousels, so you never need to prioritize them early. As mentioned, Belt is good for Sunfire cape, but also Morellonomicon and ZZ Rot. Cloak goes towards Chalice, Runaan's, and if the lobby is magic damage heavy, Dragon's Claw. All in all, there's a wide assortment of usable items. The main issue is that those items tend towards certain compositions, so pivoting can be difficult. This means that you can try to greed out your early components and wait and see what you hit in the mid game, but that may result in losing extra health. Try to aim for 1 to 2 universally good items early, like Locket, Hand of Justice, or Sunfire Cape, to boost your early game board. Alright, with items out of the way, let's talk about each stage of the game, beginning with the early game. The early game begins right away with the opening carousel and ends during the first few rounds of Stage 3. Since we've already talked about the beginning carousel, let's focus on Stage 1 first. As there's not many decisions to make during Stage 1, it's a good idea to consider your overall game plan. In the current meta, we've moved away from rerolling back to flexible play centered around rolling on level 7 and 8. What this means is your goal is to be able to hit those levels with a reasonable amount of health and gold, so aim to have a strong early and mid game. With that in mind, Stage 1 is all about picking up pairs and trying to hit 2-star units. Since the odds of finding a Chosen have gone up, it's not a bad idea to play whichever early Chosen you hit. If it ends up not working out well, you can always sell it later and be able to hit a new one relatively easily. One of the other things to keep in mind during Stage 1 is the changes to 2-cost Chosen drop rates at level 4. They went from 40% to 20%, so pre-leveling on 1-4 to try to hit a quick 2-cost Chosen is less likely to pay off, so pre-leveling is really not worth it anymore. But if you have excess gold, you can always gamble and pre-level anyway just to see. Let's move into Stage 2, where the goal should be to win rounds to preserve health. Don't be greedy during this stage, as it's better to play your strongest board than to lose streak. The only time that changes is when you're using Fortune, as losing early rounds with that trait can result in a strong mid game. Keep in mind you need to be very experienced at playing Fortune, otherwise it's generally going to be a bait. As for leveling, you can play standard by leveling on 2-1 or 2-2, whichever works best for your board. With less of a chance of hitting a 2-cost Chosen, it's not the main goal anymore to level aggressively. Instead, the goal shifts entirely over to winning rounds to preserve health. On 2-3, if you're ending the round below 10 gold, go ahead and pre-level to 5. Otherwise, if you're over 10 gold, just wait to level until after the carousel. The 2-4 carousel is important because you're going to be able to usually complete an item if you haven't already. Whatever item you do make, keep in mind it may dictate what you play later on in the game. The rest of Stage 2 is playing your strongest board and building up your economy. If you're in Krugs, it can be good to sell your current Chosen if it's being outscaled or if you haven't been winning with it, as you're likely to hit a new one on 3-1 or 3-2. With Stage 2 done, let's move into the mid-game, beginning with Stage 3. Stage 3 and 4 are the most important stages of the game. Having strong boards during these rounds ensures a better placement at the end of the game, as you'll have a better economy and higher health than other players. To have the best possible chance at doing this, let's talk about level 6, which you'll usually hit on either 3-2 or 3-3. Level 6 is a common round to roll to stabilize your board. Stabilizing means find a good mid-game carry and upgrading a few of your units, especially the front line. Champions to look out for include Sivir, Kindred, Zed, Kennen, Katarina, Akali, and mages. 6-piece synergies are also quite strong at this point of the game, the best two being Warlord and Cultist. Basically, plan to roll on level 6 if your board isn't doing well leading into round 32. If you're win streaking, you may want to roll a bit to preserve the win streak, but also you're fine to skip stage 3 to have a better roll down at level 7. Most players will need to roll some gold on level 6 to stabilize their board a bit, otherwise they run the risk of running below 50 health by stage 4. Stage 4 is the next important part of the game, as players should be hitting level 7 on 4-1. Stage 4 will form the basis of your mid-game composition, and how well this stage goes will determine whether you're able to top 4 or not. This is why having a strong Stage 3 is helpful, as players with higher health in Stage 4 can play a bit more loose with their health by playing greedily. Since Stage 4 is where compositions begin to form, let's talk about a few of the current mid-game compositions that you can expect to see in most games. Most of the compositions are centered around specific carries. Dragon Soul is a common composition that can use Olaf, Aurelion, Swain, and sometimes Shyvana as the main carry. Of those, the two most popular are Olaf and Aurelion Sol. Olaf usually gets played with Slayer and does well with splash traits like Siphoner, Mystic, and Spirit. Aurelion basically just needs a strong frontline and the mage buff to carry. He's easily one of the most flexible 4-cost carries, since his only prerequisites are decent items like Jeweled Gauntlet, the mage trait, and a frontline. Veigar is an alternative mage carry that you'll see used in either 6 Elderwood boards or 7 mage. Going back to Slayer, we already mentioned Olaf, but Tryndamere has risen quite a bit in popularity. Specifically, players are using him with Infinity Edge and Last Whisper, as he can kill units quickly with those two items. To help facilitate that, it's important to have at least one other duelist with Tryndamere and splash traits to aid him like Siphoner. Tagging in a few Warlords can also be good for the stats increased on Trynd. And then there's Kayle, who is possibly the least flexible carry of the 4 costs. You can play relatively flexible boards around her, as she only really needs Executioner, but to play her, you have to have specific items like Rageblade. Divine is also important to boost her damage and survivability. Outside of those main carries, there's plenty of other compositions to aim for. Vanguard Mystic Fabled is doing well with Nico 3 as the win condition, and even though Warlords took a major hit in 11.4, they can still scale into a top 4 comp with Katarina 3. Assassins are a solid option with either Talon carry or Akali 3. Lastly, we've seen the rise of Sivir carry this patch with either 6 Cultist or Sharpshooter. Keep in mind, as with most 3-cost carries, you do need to 3-star her at some point. That's a quick look at the meta, which is mainly dependent on which 4-cost champion you find that fits with your items. Let's shift over to talking about level 8 and stage 5. Level 8 will generally happen between 4-5 and 5-1. This is determined by how much a player has rolled on level 7, meaning that those that stabilize their boards quickly or didn't need to roll much will level to 8 earlier than those who had to roll more. In general, the rule for leveling to 8 is to make sure you have around 30 gold left over after leveling to roll with. This allows you to roll for upgrades right away if necessary. All in all, level 8 and stage 5 is about solidifying the compositions you began forming during stage 4. It's a good time to also roll for a 4-cost Chosen, which will determine your final board. Whichever Chosen you hit, you build a composition that suits them, such as Slayer for Tryndamere or Mage with Aurelion. Stage 5 is also where 5 costs are most likely to come into play, so let's talk about goals for the late game. The late game is mostly about scouting, positioning, and upgrading your existing board. Scouting is a concept everyone should be familiar with by now, but basically make it a habit of scouting after each round ends. Specifically, keep an eye out for what upgrades others are hitting and easy to position around threats like Aatrox or Zephyr. Positioning, on the other hand, is harder to explain because it's entirely dependent upon your board and the lobby you're in. But a good piece of advice to follow is to constantly be moving your board around to ensure that other players don't jump you for free. Don't get caught by having your Swain 2 get kicked instantly by a Lee Sin or your Kayle being pulled by an Aatrox. The other aspect of the late game is how best to upgrade your current board. The common way is obviously to 2-star your units. In particular, you want your main carry to be 2-star and your front line, as that's the best way to make fights go in your favor. Another way of upgrading your board is to play 5-cost champions. The strength of 5-cost champions is far diminished in 4.5 compared to the previous set 4, as 4-cost carries currently control the meta. But champions like Swain and Samira have a place in several compositions because of their traits. Ornn is a great frontline champion to farm artifacts for, but he's better to have as early as possible rather than later on. Zilean is still a fantastic late game mystic, and Azir can be useful thanks to the sand guards and crowd control. But the king of the late game right now, at least for 5 costs, is Lee Sin. Lee Sin can straight up win you games because of his ability, so if you can fit him onto your board, it is worth it. The last option for upgrading your board is 3-starring your 4-cost carry. This is not going to happen often, but it is one of the ways to secure a win. Generally, this is only doable by players with good economy, so don't attempt this if you need to hit 2-star units. As for level 9, well, it's rarely worth the gold investment. Only level 9 if you can improve your board by upgrading 5-cost units. Otherwise, it's important to spend your gold by rolling, especially if you're low on health. As always, the rule of the late game is to never end the game with gold, as spending even just an extra 10 gold could mean you finish one place higher. And that's all for today, folks. The meta feels much healthier now that we've moved away from rerolling, though it is still a bit of chaotic after all the changes in 11.4. Let us know in the comment section below what you're looking forward to most in patch 11.5. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.